72 hours. That is all the time it takes for a silent killer to turn a healthy person into a cold decedent on a morgue table. Look at this floor. These aren't scratches from furniture. These are drag marks, the final. Desperate evidence of a human life struggling in silence after a single slip in the bathroom. I am Paul. For 25 years as a homicide detective at Gangnam Police Station, I've stood over countless bodies. They called me Cheongdam Paul because I saw the truths that others missed. Today, I'm reopening a case that started with a simple fall, but ended in a biological massacre. Family members always wail the same words. Officer, she was perfectly fine until yesterday. But after 160 forensic cases, I know the truth. Fine is the most lethal lie a victim can tell. I am not a synthesized voice or an AI avatar. I am a veteran who has felt the breath leave a victim's body. If you believe your parents when they say they're okay after a fall, you are unknowingly letting their final golden hours slip away. Stay with me. I'm taking you inside the autopsy room to show you the survival clues that even experienced doctors overlook. Your healthy suspicion is the only shield they have against the clock ticking toward 72 hours. In this investigation, I will take you inside the autopsy room of the National Forensic Service and show you the survival clues that even experienced doctors might overlook. Stay with me until the very end. Your healthy suspicion is the only shield they have against the silent clock ticking towards 72 hours. When an elderly person takes a fall in the bathroom, that very day marks the beginning of a silent collapse within their body. On the surface, it may look like nothing more than a bruise or a dull ache. But underneath, sepsis is mounting a rapid, invisible assault, and it only takes 72 hours to finish the job. This is Detective Pol's Hidden Killers. While this heartbreaking case is closed, the truth remains. Tonight, we are reopening the final 72 hours of a life lost, and together we will investigate the truth hidden in those last moments. I was on duty during the early days of spring when a 911 dispatch reported a neighbor found dead. Inside the room, a bone-chilling cold hung in the air from the lack of heat, cutting through the silence of the scene. Across the floor, I saw the stark, undeniable evidence of the victim's final moments, drag marks left behind from a desperate struggle to move.
She told me she took a fall in the bathroom 3 days ago, and even though her legs looked like they were in agony, she kept insisting she was fine. By yesterday, she had lost her appetite completely and could barely eat a thing. Then this morning, I kept pounding on her door, but there was nothing, just a terrifying silence where her voice used to be.
Upon examining the scene, it was clear the victim had collapsed right in front of the bathroom door, falling exactly where she stood. A forensic inspection revealed severe bruising and significant swelling in her right hip, pointing to a traumatic injury. It was the classic, most lethal pattern of a 72-hour decline, a fatal progression triggered by a fall that turned deadly over 3 agonizing days. The medical examiner reviewed the autopsy findings, which were conducted under a search and seizure warrant to determine the precise cause of death.
The autopsy confirmed a hairline fracture in the neck of the right femur, a detail so subtle that it likely masqueraded as a simple bruise to the untrained eye. To an outsider, it seemed minor, but this fracture triggered a lethal chain reaction. It forced a sudden loss of mobility, which led to a drop in core body temperature and created the perfect breeding ground for rapid bacterial growth. Inside the lungs, we found the airway and alveolar spaces nearly obliterated, filled with thick, turbid pus and inflammatory debris that left almost no room for oxygen exchange. Prior to the moment of death, the victim's blood pressure plummeted so severely that the heart was starved of both oxygen and blood, desperately trying to pump through a failing system. In simple terms, the heart was pushed into a state of extreme overload, struggling to keep up until it finally reached its breaking point and gave out. The official cause of death is acute septic shock, a biological cascade that took only 72 hours to complete. That is a window of just 3 days, the exact amount of time it took for a simple fall to become a death sentence.
The official cause of death was determined to be acute septic shock, a rapid biological collapse that claimed a life in approximately 72 hours. In other words, it took only 3 short days for the end to arrive. Why is it that a hip fracture leads to death from sepsis in such a shockingly short window for the elderly? The reason is clear. What kills isn't just the fracture itself, but the lethal chain reaction that ravages the body during the critical 72 hours that follow. First, when a hip fracture occurs, an elderly person's mobility is paralyzed almost instantly. This sudden stasis causes blood flow to plummet, cutting off the vital oxygen supply to the tissues and triggering an explosive, uncontrollable inflammatory response throughout the body. Second, the agony of a hip fracture is so excruciating that victims instinctively freeze to avoid the slightest touch. This raw, unrelenting pain does more than hurt. It inflicts massive systemic stress that shatters the immune system, leaving the body wide open for a lethal invasion. Third, when movement ceases, the body's internal furnace begins to fail. Because the elderly already struggle to regulate their core temperature, staying in a poorly heated environment after a fall inevitably leads to hypothermia. This drop in temperature acts as an accelerant, doubling the speed at which sepsis ravages the system. Fourth, as muscles tear around the fracture site and blood pools into a stagnant hematoma, it creates a lethal breeding ground for infection. From this epicenter, bacteria multiply rapidly, migrating from the tissue into the bloodstream and finally colonizing the lungs. This is the exact moment when the biological wildfire of sepsis is ignited. Fifth, once sepsis gains a foothold, the body's internal pressure fails, and blood pressure begins a sudden, catastrophic plunge. At this critical stage, even a simple movement, like trying to stand up from a seated position, causes the blood flow to the brain to vanish. This triggers a sudden blackout, leading to a second, devastating fall on the bathroom floor, or over a doorstep, sealing the victim's fate in a cycle they can no longer escape. Sixth, our elders are experts at masking their pain. When they insist they're fine, it's often a desperate defense of their independence. In the West, admitting to a fall means admitting to losing control. They fear that if their children see their weakness, their autonomy will be stripped away, and they'll be forced into a care facility. They choose to suffer in silence rather than risk being treated like a child by their own children. By the time they can no longer hide it, the 72-hour window has already begun to close. Seventh, and most critically, the final executioner is time. If the victim had been reached and hospitalized within the first 24 hours of the fall, this case would have had a survivor. However, once the 48-hour mark is crossed, the prognosis turns grim and the situation becomes critical. By the time 72 hours, 3 full days have slipped away, the body is hit by a lethal tidal wave of sepsis, hypothermia, dehydration, and multi-organ failure. At this stage, the biological collapse is so total that recovery is no longer a possibility. It becomes a point of no return. Upon interviewing the bereaved family, the daughter provided a statement, her voice trembling as she spoke.
As soon as I heard my mother had taken a fall, I rushed to see her on the very first day. Her leg was so severely swollen it was frightening, so I begged her to go to the hospital right then and there, but she just kept refusing, insisting over and over again that she was perfectly fine. By the second day, she was shivering uncontrollably, complaining of the cold, and could barely touch her food. Even then, she bargained with me. She promised we could go to the hospital the next day if she didn't feel better by then. I should have known. I should have pushed harder to visit now. I have to live with the fact that my mother's final act of independence was actually her death sentence.
Since my sister had already visited her, I assumed everything was under control. I couldn't leave work immediately, so I planned to take her to the hospital over the weekend. I never imagined she would be gone in just 3 days. I should have dropped everything and gone to her that very first day.
The common thread in all these tragedies is the fatal combination of 2 phrases, "I'm okay," and "I'll visit this weekend." In the silence between those words, an elderly person's health deteriorates with terrifying speed. Because their bodies are highly vulnerable to pain and have lost the ability to regulate core temperature, their immune systems effectively vanish. Consequently, even a microscopic hip fracture from a fall can trigger a relentless chain reaction of sepsis, ultimately escalating into a swift and irreversible sentence of death. In the advanced stages of sepsis, even the simple act of standing up causes a catastrophic drop in blood pressure. The blood fails to reach the brain, leading to a sudden loss of consciousness and a second fatal fall, often right in front of the bathroom door.
Hello, everyone. I am Detective Han, your dedicated investigator for health and safety. From this moment on, I am here to deliver a critical briefing on the survival clues, essential steps to ensure that a fall does not lead to a fatal outcome for our parents and elders. The first survival clue is simple but absolute. If an elderly person suffers a fall, you must take them to the hospital immediately, no matter what. A hairline fracture will never heal on its own. The second survival clue is to monitor any decrease in food intake, as this is often the primary warning signal of early-stage sepsis. The third survival clue is to maintain a warm environment at all costs. If the body is left in a state of hypothermia, the rate of deterioration doubles in an instant. The fourth survival clue is for those whose parents live alone. Simply making a phone call is meaningless. You must physically go and verify their condition with your own eyes. The fifth and final survival clue is a warning against delay because sepsis progresses by the hour. Waiting until the weekend for a medical exam will be too late. Don't believe your parents when they say they are okay. You must go and verify it yourself. Don't just take their word for it when your parents say they're okay. Go and see for yourself. This concludes the briefing. This was Detective Han. Thank you.
The most heartbreaking common thread among the cases I have investigated is the phrase, "I'm okay," and the attitude of, "let's just wait and see a bit longer." In the United States, when an elderly person falls, their "I'm okay" is rarely about the pain. It is about the terror of losing their independence, the fear that this single moment might be a one-way ticket to a nursing home. They are not just protecting your feelings, they are desperately defending their freedom. But if your parent takes a fall, you must look past their pride and suspect the hidden medical crisis lurking beneath that silence. This healthy suspicion, this refusal to just wait and see, is the only thing that stands between the person you love and a fatal outcome. Don't believe their words. Verify their reality. This small act of vigilance, this healthy suspicion, is exactly what saves the lives of the people we love. If you are watching this video right now, by watching this to the end, you have now secured the final piece of the survival file for the people you love. This channel is not just about crime stories. This is a record dedicated to your ultimate survival. Whether it's crime or disease, we track how to protect ourselves from all dangers that threaten our lives. Please subscribe, like, and leave a comment to share your thoughts. Your one comment could be the very thing that saves another life. This has been Detective Pol's survival file, and the clues will continue.